do you fight off that depression sneaking in there every once in a while?
That was brutal, and it stuck in there a lot more than once in a while. It was constant for months, and probably years, and there was very little I could do about it. I mean, I couldn't move. I used to be able to relieve a lot of my anxieties and stress by going out on the athletic field and just running around and being active and running into people. And now I had no release for the stresses and the anxieties. I was just trapped in my body. And there were times where I actually just tried to lose my mind. I think I would be better off if I didn't know what was going on. And quite frankly, Gary, I was so depressed. If I was physically able to take my life, I probably would have tried to do that. But I wasn't even physically able to do that.
Welcome, friends. I'm Gary Scott, and this is the What If You Could podcast. And today, my guest is Ken Kunken. And Ken is the author of I Dream of Things That Never Were. Uh, Ken broke his neck playing football for Cornell University in 1970, leaving him almost totally paralyzed from the shoulders down. And this is Ken's story. So, welcome, my friend Ken, all the way from lovely, balmy New York. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me as your guest.
Before we get started, like I mentioned, I do, because of the What If You Could podcast, I asked all my guests the What If You Could question. So, Ken Kunken, what is your What If You Could?
Well, that's an interesting question. And I thought about that a lot, actually, even before this podcast. As you mentioned, I had a spinal cord injury playing football in 1970. And when I think of the question, what if I could, I think back to what if I didn't get hurt during that game? How would my life be different? And would I choose to go back in time and not have that spinal cord injury? And quite frankly, it's a difficult question for me. I know I'm kind of starting near the end and not at the beginning when I say that I actually am having a wonderful life, despite the fact that I'm almost totally paralyzed. I'm married with a tremendously wonderful wife named Anna, and we've been married for more than 22 years. And during that marriage, we were blessed to become parents. Through the miracle of in vitro fertilization, I am the father of triplet sons, Joey, Jimmy, and Timmy. This past week, they turned 21 years old. So when I think, what if I could, would I go back in time and change my life and risk not having my wife, Anna, and my three wonderful sons in it? And the answer is definitely, I definitely would not risk that. I definitely would not do that. There's nothing more important to me than my wife and children.
Man, I love that. And Ken, I mean, let's face it, had you not had this incident happen, you might not be in the Hall of Fame. Not everybody gets to be in a Hall of Fame, and you're in the Susan M. Daniels Disability Mentoring Hall of Fame. And I've met interviewed a number of people who are in different halls of fame. I never heard of that one, but honestly, you've achieved more um, than most people ever will. It's astounding. So, yeah, maybe not going back and changing it is a good thing.
And Gary, I have to say, I was able to achieve a lot of different things because I had a lot of help every step of the way. There was nothing I could have accomplished on my own without the tremendous, tremendous help of my family and friends. And for that, I'll always be grateful.
Let's go back. I've interviewed, I've had the blessings of talking to a lot of people who have gone through some serious challenges like yours. And that initial incident, where you're laying there in the hospital, back all the way to 1970. It's a long time ago, but what's some thoughts on that? I'm sure you didn't think I'm going to do all the things I did, help so much with disability, uh, do, all the work becoming a lawyer and getting into the district attorney's and like that. But what's your thought while you're laying there? Do you remember what was kind of going through your mind when that was happening?
I really didn't know what was happening to my body. I was conscious the whole time. I broke my neck making a tackle on a kickoff in a lightweight football game against Columbia University. And as soon as I tackled the ball carrier, I felt like a stinging numbness go through my body. And instantly I was paralyzed. I could not move a muscle. And I really didn't know what was happening. I had not even heard of a spinal cord injury before my injury. Now, I was injured in 1970. This was about 25 years before Christopher Reeve's devastating injury. And Christopher Reeve was a tremendous role model for all of us. And I was really devastated when he got hurt and what he had to go through. But I didn't have a role model at the time of my injury. I didn't know of anybody else that was living in my condition at that time. So I really didn't know what to expect or what was happening to me. And I spent the next 9 months and 20 days in various hospitals and rehabilitation centers. And the doctors, the medical professionals seemed reluctant to really tell me much about my condition. I had a number of roommates while I was in the rehab facility who had been injured a lot longer than I was. And even though they had more movement than I had, they didn't seem to be doing much with their lives. And I remember lying in bed thinking, what possible future could I have if I'm more limited than my roommates and they didn't seem to be doing much? And I asked a lot of questions and received very few answers. And I remember the rehab facility that I was at, it was called the Rusk Institute in New York City. They had put out a pamphlet describing all different aspects of spinal cord injury. And they broke it down based on where you're injured in your spinal cord. I'm injured in the neck between the fourth and fifth cervical. And they had a page that would describe what type of movement you would have. And I know it mentioned I might have some biceps, but no triceps. And, it was right on point. And it mentioned how it affect my bodily functions and how it affect my bladder and my bowels and my breathing. And it was right on point again. And they had a page about what type of careers you could expect to eventually be able to go into. And the only career I saw for my injury would be to someday sell magazine subscriptions over the telephone. And I was devastated. I mean, at the time I got hurt, I had just started my junior year at Cornell University, one of the most prestigious schools in the country. And I was studying industrial engineering. And now I'm looking forward to a career selling magazine subscriptions over the telephone. And the more I thought about it, I said, wait a minute. I cannot even dial a telephone or take notes. I couldn't write or even do that. And I remember lying in bed being totally devastated. What type of future could I look forward to? And I was fortunate that a vocational counselor at Rusk by the name of Joyce Mesh encouraged me to return to school and continue my education. So when I was finally discharged from the rehab center, I returned to Cornell University just 9 days after I got out of the hospital. And what an awakening that was, Gary. You have to remember, this was more than 20 years before the Americans with Disabilities Act took effect. None of the facilities were wheelchair accessible. One of my classes was in a building that had 16 steps just to get in. And I had classes in that 3 times a week. And my dorm room was in a building that had 10 steps to get in. Gary, on my first day of classes, I had to be either pulled up or bounced down close to 100 steps just to attend my first day. And I remember lying in bed when I got back from class, staring at the ceiling, thinking, I must be crazy to be back at Cornell, trying to resume my studies and facing these obstacles. And I was still trying to get used to my new physical condition. but I had no plan B. I didn't know what else I was going to do at that point unless I stayed at school and tried to continue with my education. And boy, when I think back to those times now, it just seems so overwhelming. But you mentioned my book, I Dream of Things That Never Were. And I want to tell you where I got the title of that book. When I was still in the rehab facility, 6 months after my injury, I was asked to testify before a United States Health Subcommittee chaired by Senator Edward Kennedy. And 8 days after my testimony, Senator Kennedy sent me a glass paperweight in the mail that had an inscription on it that the senator said his late brother Robert Kennedy liked very much. And those words have always been very meaningful to me. The inscription read, "Some men see things as they are and say why. I dream of things that never were and say why not." And that's where I got the title of my book, because I was dreaming of things that never were. You just didn't see quadriplegics back at Cornell going through this at that time. I really didn't even see people out in public who were quadriplegics because you couldn't get around. Facilities were not wheelchair accessible. Buildings had steps. There were no curb cuts. There was no accessible public transportation. And I kept dreaming of things that never were. So when I was in the hospital, a friend of my aunt's by the name of Al Meglin visited me in the hospital, and he suggested that I write down my thoughts and what I was going through, because most people had no idea what a spinal cord injury was like and what the rehab process was like. So I actually started writing my book way back 6 months after my injury in 1971. And I worked on that book for more than 50 years.
Did you I wanna touch on Chris Reeves in a minute, but did you, just talk into a tape recorder? I mean, how did you start working on the book? You obviously said you weren't writing, so did you just speak into a tape recorder all these years, or how did you document all this? How'd you write down your thoughts?
And it's a good question. Initially, this friend of my aunt, Al Meglin, used to visit me at the rehab facility once a week. And he'd ask me to tell him what I was going through. And he would try and write it down in a modified shorthand. And then he'd come back the next week and try and read the notes he had written, and they were like indecipherable. And he had trouble doing it. Um, but we did that for a few months, and then I went back to school. So when I'd come home on vacations, I would try and meet with him again. And finally, after a while, we just stopped meeting. But in rehab, I learned with some braces and splints how to actually type a little bit on an IBM Selectric typewriter. I'd have my arm up in the air in a special contraption, prosthetic that would support my arm. And with the eraser of a pencil, I could type really, really slowly, and on a good day, I could get up to 12 words a minute, but I could only keep that up for maybe a minute or two before my arm would fatigue. So a number of times I would try and set myself up with a computer. I mean, by the typewriter, I'd have my aide set me up and I would try and type a little bit. And that took forever. And I would start and stop and start and stop over years and years of that. And then eventually, when I got married, a little more than 22 years ago, um, I decided to go back and work on the book with my wife, Anna. And it was really difficult because, one, she was really busy with our triplets. They were babies. And here she's trying to take care of me because she was my caregiver as well, and take care of three little babies. And we would try and squeeze in a little bit of time when we could. And it took us a long, long time. But it was interesting being able to sit next to my wife for extended periods when she wasn't dealing with the babies and tell her my story, because a lot of what I dictated, she had never heard before. And she kept encouraging me to go into more detail so she would know more about it and the possible readers would know more about it. And after a long, long time, we finally completed it. And I'm so glad because it gives my boys something to read where they can know more about my history and the family history and all my family has done for me to help me get to where I am.
That's awesome. Yeah, Anna's a rock star.
Mm, s-
I
mm,
I still think you type faster than I do, so we'll get that out of the way. But that just shows, I mean, even back then, that level of
mm,
determination. I mean, you were a determined dude. I mean, like you said, a lot of people, I mean, myself included, I had nothing like what you did. But after I lost my wife, I went into a deep, dark,
mm,
depression for a number of
mm,
years, and I was perfectly healthy. I was perfectly fine. So it's natural to have something like that happen and want to give up. Just to touch on Chris Reeves a little bit, I know that
mm,
I loved Christopher Reeves. I think most people did. He was just one of those guys that pretty much everyone could like.
mm.
And I love horse jumping. We had horses. We have a big horse jumping facility out here in the desert where I live that we would go visit. And I remember that tragedy, just watching him go over that and his hands get caught up and just, you know, it was tragic. But like you, I mean, he chose to
Mm,
really embrace it.
mm.
At what point did you say, I'm going to not just be a college student, but I'm going to embrace my disability? I'm going to embrace helping other people with theirs.
That's a good question. Let me just first start, though, to go back to Christopher Reeve. Coincidentally, Christopher Reeve was a freshman at Cornell the year I got hurt. Now, we didn't know each other. I had never met him. And
What
that,
a trip.
yeah,
That's crazy.
yeah. Now, most people, of
Wow.
course, hadn't heard of Christopher Reeve back then. This was, he was only a freshman and before he did all these movies. But coincidentally, he was a freshman there the year I got hurt.
Wow.
But you talk about how I was able to do what I did and how I was able to push myself and get motivated. And I first have to say, I was very motivated before my injury. You don't go to Cornell, study engineering, and play a sport at the same time and not be very motivated. But it was real tough to stay motivated following my injury. And I have to attribute that to my family and friends who continuously encouraged me to go on. They kept saying, while you have a physical disability, your mind is still intact and that I have to make the most of it. And in my mind, I was trying to just ignore my injury as best I could and say, I'm still going to go on despite this injury. Hopefully, my physical condition's going to improve. And I kept expecting that it would because I really didn't know what a spinal cord injury entailed. And I kept thinking, until that eventual cure comes about, I'm going to try and make the most of my life and not just sit back as I unfortunately felt some of my roommates in the rehab center were doing. So, thanks to the help of my family and friends, I pushed myself to get back. And I was actually grateful for the administration at Cornell to allow me to go back to school. I mean, they weren't used to obviously dealing with somebody in my condition. And certainly their school was not handicapped accessible. But through a lot of help from family, friends, personal care attendants that I needed to use, classmates, fraternity brothers, football teammates, I was able to go back to school.
I have two very good
Mm, mm,
close family friends that
mm,
both of their one of them went to Cornell. We went to
mm.
high school together. He went there for political science, and my other friend's daughter went there for food and beverage management because it has one of the best hotel food and beverage management cor- colleges in the world. Um, it's a gorgeous campus. It's a beautiful campus, but it's absolutely not set up for someone who had your disability and had your challenges getting around. It's
That's
what,
for sure.
200, it's like 200 years old, isn't it? I mean,
That's
it's
one
old.
in 200 years. Well,
Uh,
actually, no, 1865 is, I believe, when it started. About 160 years old.
yeah.
But I might add, when I went back to school, again, everything was so new to me as well as the administration. And the administration was really trying to be helpful, but they didn't know how. And I remember I asked them, could they at least put in a ramp by my dorm so I wouldn't have to go up and down those 10 steps a few times each day. And, again, they really were trying to be helpful, but they said, we really can't do that because if we were to put in a ramp there, we would have to remove 2 bushes. And they were concerned students might protest if they were to remove those 2 bushes. Now, Gary, you got to remember, this was during the time of the Vietnam War. Students were protesting about everything, and it was very real that students might protest removing the bushes. Although I would have to say, I know the students up there would have done anything for me to help me. They were real, real supportive. But that was the attitude back then when I first went back. And what happened is at the beginning of my second semester back at Cornell, we had a fire drill. Now, of course, when there's a fire drill, everybody has to evacuate the building. And the next day, one of the administrators approached me and asked how I managed during the drill. And, I didn't think twice. I was being very honest. I said, I was able to get out by having my attendant bounce me in my wheelchair down the 10 steps. But I felt bad because I know I slowed up the other students who were exiting. So wouldn't you know, within 2 weeks, they put in a ramp. And while it was clear to me that ramp was not put in for my convenience, but for the other students' safety, that was still fine with me because at least I now had a ramp to use. And I might add, not one student complained about removing the 2 bushes.
Of course not. No, of course. But it's funny in today's world where everyone does protest about everything and anything that comes along. We're offended by everything. If I didn't get enough sprinkles on my latte frappuccino, I'm going to protest. But people forget. I'm old enough to remember. People forget that time where our country was on fire. I mean, it was the civil rights movement. It was Vietnam. It was, Bobby got shot, JFK got shot, Martin Luther King Jr. got shot. I mean, the 60s were pretty wicked times in our country. People forget, they think we're on fire now. They forget how rough it was then. And even going to college, a lot of people were mad at people who were going to college. It was a bizarre time. But you went back, but you made a number of changes. You just didn't go back and say, "Oh, I'm gonna try to be an engineer again." You made a number of changes along the way, which is awesome. You never stopped learning and growing and changing. That's phenomenal.
Thank you. And again, I have to say, I had a lot of help every step of the way. But through that help, I became the first quadriplegic to graduate from Cornell University. But I graduated with a degree in industrial engineering, and it was clear to me that was not a very viable field for me. I mean, this was well before the age of laptop computers. And fortunately, while I was at Cornell, I took an elective in psychology. And my psychology professor, a person by the name of Dr. James Moss, took an interest in me, and he encouraged me to pursue a career in counseling. Through his advice, I then stayed at Cornell and I earned a Master of Arts degree where I majored in counseling and student personnel administration. And I became the first quadriplegic to ever earn a graduate degree from Cornell. But then to increase my counseling credentials, I went to Columbia University, the school I actually got injured playing against, and I earned a second master's degree. This one was a Master of Education degree where I majored in psychological counseling and rehabilitation. And I decided to look for a job in the rehabilitation counseling field. And I guess I was feeling fairly confident that now that I had 2 degrees from Cornell and one from Columbia, 3 prestigious Ivy League degrees, 2 master's degrees, that I shouldn't have too much difficulty getting a job. Well, to my dismay, no one would hire me. Everyone felt that I was just too disabled to work. I was even turned down when I offered to volunteer my services. And I might add that when I first started my second master's at Columbia, I met with my advisor. Now, this is an advisor in the rehab counseling program who told me even after I graduated, I would probably have a lot of difficulty ever getting a job. because he said, despite what they teach, even people in the rehab field would be hesitant, let's say, to hire somebody in my condition. So that's what it was like back then. But I was fortunate that I found one organization willing to give me the opportunity to show what I could do. And for that, I'll always be grateful to them. They changed my life. And that organization was called at the time Abilities Incorporated, which was part of what was called the Human Resources Center. It's now called the Viscardi Center here on Long Island after its founder, Dr. Henry Viscardi Jr. And they hired me to work as vocational rehabilitation counselor for other individuals with severe disabilities. And that changed my life.
You know, I think back to what you said about when they came in and they were like, okay, well, here's kind of like what your body's going to do and what your body's going to be like and what you're going to go through. And oh, by the way, here's a list of stuff that you're qualified for. Um, I kind of don't think that's a good idea. I understand what they're doing. Maybe they're thinking, giving people hope, like, hey, there are things you can do. Don't think you can't do anything. But but when it's such a limited list, and when you put in someone's mind, this is all you're capable of now, is really maybe not a good thing because your mind was so much more. You weren't going to accept, dude, I'm not going to sell phone books over the phone, man. I'm going to do great things.
Uh, it goes back to people's expectations. And one of my criticisms was that people had such limited expectations for somebody with a disability. And the problem is that people's performance often rises and falls based upon what others expect of them, what others think they could do. And it's that attitude from others that often limits what you can eventually do or accomplish. And the expectations for me were so limited. And that's one of my criticisms of the treatment that I had back then. But I understand it because you didn't see people in my condition out in public back then. You didn't see them on the streets because you couldn't get around. Nothing was accessible. You didn't see them in the workplace. You didn't see them on public transportation. So people just didn't know and were hesitant to give you the opportunity to show what you could do.
I interviewed a guy named Scott Martin. And Scott Martin was a soccer coach, college, rising way up through the ranks, Olympics, all that stuff. And he was a good soccer player. And then one day he woke up in the hospital after being in a coma for a month, and they had cut off his hands and his feet, which isn't really great for a soccer coach to not have feet or hands. Um, and so Scott had the mindset that you had. Um, when he went into rehab, they were like babying him, like, okay, well, this is going to be hard and it's going to take years. And he's like, no, man, I got to get back to college. I got to be there. I got a team. Let's just get through this. I got this. Right. And he had the same mindset of you. It's like, all right, this is where I am, but this isn't what I am. And I'm not going to allow this to stop me from getting back on the field and coaching. Um, and you said, I'm not going to stop this from letting me go back to school, getting my education, and doing something. What a great mindset. It's not easy to have.
Thank you. I remember the vocational counselor I had at the Rusk Institute, a woman by the name of by the name of Joyce Mesh. And I remember she told me, let people treat you like you're an invalid. Because think about what that word means. Just separate it into its two syllables. Said your life still has a lot of value, and you've got to show that to people. You have value. Don't let them treat you like you don't. And I found that to be an encouraging statement as well. I needed to show people and show myself. I actually had to convince myself as well that my life still had value. And it took a lot of effort, not only on my part, but on my relatives' part, my family, my friends, to help me every step of the way. Mm,
It's natural.
mm, mm.
It's almost it would be unnatural if you didn't go there. It would probably set you up for more challenging mental issues if you didn't go there. But it's natural to have bouts of depression. It's natural to grieve for the loss that you felt at the time, that this is a big loss for my life. And to have the depression, I know you chat about that in the book a little bit. But how'd you deal with that part of like, this is the body I have now. My mind is sharp. I'm a brilliant person. There's so much I could do. Yet, how do you fight off that depression sneaking in there every once in a while?
That was brutal, and it stuck in there a lot more than once in a while. It was constant for months, months, and probably years. Um, and there was very little I could do about it. I mean, I couldn't move. I used to be able to relieve a lot of my anxieties and stress by going out on the athletic field and just running around and being active and running into people. And now I had no release for the stresses and the anxieties. I was just trapped in my body. And there were times where I actually just tried to lose my mind. I think I would be better off if I didn't know what was going on. And quite frankly, Gary, I was so depressed. If I was physically able to take my life, I probably would have tried to do that. But I wasn't even physically able to do that. But I have to go back and say once again, my family and friends kept doing everything they could do to keep my spirits up, to encourage me to move forward. And it went back to grandparents, aunts,
Mm.
uncles, cousins, as well as, my father, my brother, my sister. Everybody was really trying to help me in every way that they could. And they got me through this. And it made a huge difference.
You were an honorable man.
Mm.
You went into some honorable professions, and then you decided to go into law. What what made you make that shift, um, to practice law? I mean, did you have that desire when you were younger, or where on earth did that come from?
Well, when I was studying industrial engineering, it was clear to me that industrial engineering was not the right field for me. But I knew there were a number of people studying engineering that later went into either law or business. And I have a brother named Steve who's 2 years older than me, who actually went into law. And at the time of my injury, he was still in law school. But then he went to work for the public defender's office on Long Island, the Legal Aid Society. And I used to watch him in court and think, boy, this looks fascinating. And at least to me, it looked like something I could use my voice for and not have to do a lot of writing and research, although there is a lot of that involved. But I remember when I was working as a rehab counselor, they kept expanding my duties. And one of the things they had me do was speak before groups and organizations concerning affirmative action and non discrimination for people with disabilities. And I would often be asked questions, and I would certainly do my best to answer them appropriately. But I was always very careful to caution the questioners they should really speak with a lawyer about their concerns. And I guess it didn't take long, Gary, before I started to think, there's no reason why I couldn't become that lawyer. So I left my job and went to Hofstra University School of Law. And it was a good, good decision.
Are you the first quadriplegic or paralyzed, person to pass the bar?
No, no, there were others before me, although I might add that when I took it, you still had to do the 2-day bar exam in those 2 days. Now they've increased the time period that you get. I think they've increased it to like 4 days. They only allowed me to start a little bit earlier than the other test takers, which means, instead of starting at 9, I'd still need to get up at like 5 in the morning just to get there to be able to start at like 8:15 or 8:30, and I still had to finish on time. But there was some other quadriplegics uh, that graduated law school, were working in the field. I didn't know them at the time. I know there weren't any quadriplegic assistant district attorneys on Long Island when I later went to work as an assistant district attorney. So I didn't get to see other quadriplegics in the courtroom, but I just loved the opportunity to do that. And I did an internship at the district attorney's office after my second year of law school. And I just thought it was fascinating and really, really interesting. And I was so pleased that the person in charge of hiring had the guts to give me the opportunity to show what I could do. I mean, you just didn't see a quadriplegic assistant district attorney at the time. But I was fortunate. The district attorney at the time, a person by the name of Dennis Dillon, placed his hiring decisions on my abilities rather than my disability.
What do how do we address people now who have disabilities? Do we still say disabled? I know we're changing titles of everything, trying to make things more, I don't know, socially acceptable. I don't know what the term is, but what I mean, is paraplegic right? Is it disabled, paralyzed? What are the titles that are we use for folks who have gone through what you have?
I don't think there's any one title that will please everybody.
Oh,
For
no.
me, I remember just a few years after I was injured, I had a young kid come up to me, and kids are so innocent, and they don't mean to offend you, but I could see him staring at me, and he came up to me and he said, "Are you a cripple?" And that name really bothered me. That word, a cripple. I never thought of myself as a cripple, but I know he didn't mean anything offensive or negative about it. This is how kids talk or questions they have. As far as I'm concerned, I don't have any one label that I either like or don't like. When I refer to myself, I'm a person with a disability. So first comes the person itself and then the disability. And I'm a quadriplegic, meaning I'm limited in the use of all four limbs, my arms and my legs. But, there's no one term for somebody with a disability that would make everybody feel comfortable or good. Everybody has their own reaction to it. For me personally, I'm a person with a disability. I am a quadriplegic, and I'm also a person with a lot of ability. And there's an awful lot I could still do.
I love that. That is awesome. That's awesome. And speaking of abilities, I do want to touch more on your work as an attorney and at the and in the court system and stuff like that. But what is Abilities Inc. or what was Abilities Inc. or the current title that it is now? What is that Abilities Inc.? What was it?
Well, that was started by Dr. Henry Viscardi way back in 1952, I believe it was. And Dr. Viscardi was the individual who was born without legs. He just had stumps for legs and walked on artificial legs, prosthetics. And he eventually started his own company where he was employing people with disabilities to do work. And he wanted to emphasize the ability of these people, not their disability. So he called his company Abilities Inc.
Mm.
And that's how that got started. And it's still in existence now on Long Island. In fact, I'm very proud to say I'm actually on the board of directors of the Viscardi Center on Long Island. And I am so proud to be serving on that board. But Dr. Viscardi started Abilities Inc., and it expanded where he started a school for handicapped children from preschool all the way up through high school. And he also has a place there called, well, it used to be called the Human Resources Center. It's now called the Viscardi Center that does other type of work that helps place people with disabilities or train people with disabilities for other types of jobs. They do research on various aspects of people with disabilities and problems they're facing. And it's just a tremendous, tremendous place. And I'm so proud to be on their board of directors. In fact, they recently obtained a museum for disability. It's the only museum I'm aware of that's actually a museum for disability, concerning disability. And that's now at the Viscardi Center in Long Island. And to tell you a little bit more about my family, they took such an interest in me for over these years that my cousin Roy Danis became so involved in my life that he's now chairman of the board of directors at the Viscardi Center.
Wow. Yeah, they you kind of wrap the whole family into your life and your abilities and disabilities and stuff. And that campus makes me think of the movie X-Men, where they had these people who some people thought were weird or disabled or whatever. Um, but they all had special powers. They weren't disabled at all. They had just greater powers or different powers. The guy
You
from
know,
Star Trek who
I-
who was in the wheelchair, who ran the place. It's kind of what I think of what you just described.
right. Well, that really changed my life. And just working there not only taught me how to function in an office, how to function as an employee on what was then basically a 9 to 5 job, but it did wonders for my self confidence, my self esteem, my feelings of self worth and self value. And it provided me an income as well, which was very nice.
Yeah.
And they gave me the confidence not only to work there, but to eventually leave and go to law school. But the best part about it was now I finally had the opportunity to help others. Before I started there, and I started there 6.5 years after my injury, I was the recipient of a lot of help from so many people, and I still am. I'm still a recipient of it, but I didn't have the opportunity to give back. And they gave me that opportunity to help others. And that made me feel so much better about myself. And I'm so glad that I'm able to stay involved in their organization, on their board of directors. And, one of my missions in life is to encourage others to treat people with disabilities as if they would treat anybody else who doesn't have a disability, and to employ people that are qualified for the job to help them get in the workplace. And, I found working at this job helped me deal with my own depression, my own mood swings for what I was going through, because every day I'm reminded when I attempt to do anything that I can't move and I need help from people. They help me deal with that as
And there's just such a true saying, and I used to always tell my two
well.
boys when they were little, if you're feeling down, you know, go help somebody. Trust me, there's someone going through worse than what you're going through. Go help somebody. You'll feel better. And and if I said it one time, I've said it 5 million, and they got so tired of my little limerick of, I had the blues because I had no shoes until I met a man on the street who had no feet. And like, yeah, Dad, I know. If I hear that one more time, I'm gonna hit you with my macaroni and cheese. But it's so true, when you have the ability to help others, kind of takes your thoughts off yourself for a little bit, just for that time, especially when you're going through that deep depression. You know, Now, I mean, the accessibility is so different from work that you've done and other people have done. The vans, the wheelchairs, the curbs, the sidewalks, the stairs. The accessibility you see disabled people in television and movies and working. It's just a whole different world from what you had to deal with when you first came
Yeah, I mean,
upon
let
this.
me give a quick comment on that. Again, this was well before the Americans with Disabilities Act took effect, including when I started at the district attorney's office. So, Gary, here I went through 3 years of law school. I passed the difficult New York State bar exam the first time that I took it after putting in a lot of study. And I began my work by going through a 4 week, very intensive training program that taught us all aspects of trial techniques from a prosecutor's perspective. And I was so proud and excited to go to court my first day, and I couldn't fit through the swinging doorways in the courtroom to
Oh,
get to the prosecutor's table. It's like, are you kidding me? What more do I need to do just to have this opportunity to work? Um, that's what it was like. And it
oh,
really,
what a crazy metaphor. You know, God, you get through this, you get through the depression, you get yourself back in school, your mindset is right, you pass the bar, which like I think 80% of the people don't on their first try. And California and New York are the two hardest. You do all this, you're prepared, you go in there and son of a biscuit, man, boom, you hit the freaking I mean, that had to be like, "Lord, seriously, what did you what is there anything else you'd like to toss my way?"
Well, they did actually. My first assignment was to our traffic court bureau, which was located on the second floor of a neighboring building. And Gary, I was promoted after just 3 days in traffic court because the elevator was broken and no one knew when it would be fixed. So actually, that's how I got my first promotion. So I guess maybe it actually worked in my favor at one time. But yeah, that's what it was like. And I remember one of the supervisors that later was a strong advocate for me and appreciated what I was doing, initially questioned why I was even hired because, as he put it, he can't even write. Well, no, I couldn't write, but I learned other ways of dealing with my job and handling the material and becoming a trial lawyer despite that. And I think people have to recognize things don't have to be done a certain way to accomplish a task. And people with disabilities often find other ways of accomplishing a task that you may never have thought about.
Yeah, I have a lot of friends who are attorneys, and I don't like any attorneys except they do tell the best jokes about attorneys, um, because it's just what it is, right? Without their paralegals, I don't know what these guys would do. These guys wouldn't even know how to find their butt with both hands. I mean, literally, when they're putting together these cases, and a couple of my buddies are huge, really high end, they have these high end uh, legal firms. Honestly, I mean, they show up and do the dog and pony show, but if it wasn't for the paralegals who do all the research, who do all the backgrounds and get everything prepared to hand it to the attorney, who then goes and, is an actor in the stage, it's tough. So, I mean, really, if you have a good paralegal or someone who is a good assistant for you, you don't have to write anyways, right?
Absolutely. And I was fortunate. We had some tremendous paralegals. One of them in particular, a woman by the name of Trina Nocerino, helped me so much every step of the way. It was a pleasure going to work knowing whatever I needed, she would be there to assist me, as well as the head secretary, a woman by the name of Susan Ziegler, who did everything she could to make sure I had the proper support staff that helped me with whatever I needed. And that made a huge difference. In addition, at the district attorney's office, we had a lot of student interns. So while I benefited a lot from their help, many of them thanked me for helping them decide on a career in law and what they wanted to do. And in fact, one of my sons is now considering doing an internship at the Nassau County District Attorney's Office this summer. Although I might add, my three boys are studying three separate majors. They're juniors now in different colleges in upstate New York. One is studying renewable energy at the State University of New York at Morrisville. One is studying communications and political affairs at Syracuse University, wants to be a journalist. And the third one is actually studying mechanical engineering at my alma mater, Cornell University.
Wow.
So it's exciting to see my three sons pursuing three different majors, three different fields at three different schools and watching them grow and develop and see what they're going to do. But I might add,
And they all graduated from your high school.
that's right, 55 years after I graduated from Oceanside High School, my sons graduated there. And they are so attuned now to helping people with disabilities. That's wonderful to see too. And I remember even when they were little, they would go out and come back to me, and tell me, Dad, you could go there. They have a ramp. Success. I mean, even as little kids, they would notice that and come back and tell me.
Oh, kids are the best at that. And like that young man who walked up and asked if you were crippled, kids have the biggest hearts. They're so innocent. They don't mean that. But on the other hand, like you said, they're always looking out for good. Unfortunately, the world messes them up, but they don't come out that way. And to have triplets, what a joy. I mean, that had to be poor Anna. That had to be just a
Yeah.
complete circus monkey show going on in there all the time.
Was it ever? I mean, she was not only taking care of the three babies, but me as well. I mean, right. Talk about going above and beyond the call of duty. I
I'm
just,
sure you were the toughest of the 4, I'm sure.
oh, I was by far. but my boys grew up helping me as well. And they know how to do a lot of things to help daddy get through the day. And they're the joys of my life, and it made a huge difference. But I might add, a lot of people didn't think or expect somebody with my type of disability could ever have the type of family life that I have, to get married, to become a parent, to be a dad, and contribute to the family as a father. And now you see more and more people doing that and recognizing that people with a disability can be included in all aspects of society. And that's so important.
I have 2 sons,
Mhm,
and, they're absolutely the
mhm,
most wonderful. They had a great mom. God bless her. Um, they're the most
mhm,
wonderful, kind, men you'll ever meet. But I'll tell you what, having them there and in my darkest times after their mom passed and what they were going through losing their mom and my partner, having that family support that you had is so crucial. I it I feel for people who are so angry about families or not wanting families, so adamant about not wanting families and stuff. And I just think, gosh, if you just knew the blessing it was, to have those boys, to have Anna, what a what an amazing gift they are for you, right?
So, they're the best remedy for depression. When I'm having a bad day, when things just seem overwhelming, I see the smiles on their faces and it just picks me right up. I mean, how could you be depressed when you are surrounded by so much love, and see the wonders of the people around you and all that they're doing?
Oh God, I love that. I love that. And I think of all the changes, Stephen Hawking's
Mhm.
was like a hero, such a brilliant guy with what happened to him was tough. And we have the Paralympics now. You watch these athletes, it's so funny, now they're pissed off because they have a guy with a sling for a leg beating guys in normal race. Like, well, you can't be and now you can't you can't race against us. It's not fair. You don't have a leg. You've got the thing. He goes, yeah, I know I don't have a leg. But what amazing changes, right? Since this happened to you in 1970. I mean, let's face it, 55 years is a long time. It probably took too long. And it's probably still not even enough, right? I mean, what more changes do you think that we need?
Well, first I'd come back to people's attitudes still need to be changed. It's gotten a lot better over the years, but so many people still think there are limitations that they place on people that are unnecessary. And when I hear that there is some in our current administration who seem to have a negative impact of DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, I think they just don't really appreciate the benefits that we all derive from diversity, equity, and inclusion, including people that may be different than you, whether they're from a different country, a different religion, a different type of physical or mental or intellectual ability. That still needs to be included, and it helps everybody when they do that. Um, in the district attorney's office, when you leave the job, you go through what they call an exit interview, where you tell a person in personnel what you like best about the job, what you thought could be improved. And I'm so happy to say and so proud to say, many times I was told people said one of the best parts of their job was meeting, getting to know, and working with me. And the reason why I want to say that is what they were talking about is meeting, working with, and getting to know somebody with a significant disability. Because unless they had a close relative with a disability, most people never came in contact on a daily basis with somebody with a disability. And they found that helped them enormously in their job. It helped inspire and motivate them to do a better job. And this is what they have told people in our office, that it's helped them to work alongside somebody with a disability. And I'm so proud and happy to hear that.
I love that. I love that. Ken, this has been wonderful. I hope everyone runs out and gets the book and stuff. But I lied earlier. I could have been a good attorney. I lied earlier. I said I only had one question. which is the what if you could question. And I always give that one to people before so that they could
Mm.
think about it. But I actually have two questions I like, but I never give people this second question. The second question is before we skedaddle, before we sign off, what would be your last thought for people? What would be the last message, whether from your history, maybe it's a quote, you already said one great quote. What would be a message that really means something to Ken that you'd like to leave us with before we sign off today?
Well, never give up. There's an awful lot people can do if they work hard, remain motivated, try their best, and hopefully get help and assistance from those around them. Everybody could still fulfill their dreams. You could learn from your mistakes. Sometimes you need to find other ways to do things to help you accomplish a task. Um, but I go back to the title of my book. I dream of things that never were. I encourage everybody to dream of things that never were. Don't be limited by what other people have done. Just because something has not been done before doesn't mean you cannot do it now. If you set your sights on it, reaching a goal, working hard to accomplish it, don't listen to the naysayers. Don't listen to the people who tell you you can't do something or that it's just too difficult. What's important is that you believe in yourself, that you believe you can do it. It reminds me of a little cartoon that I saw that somebody once gave me. It shows, a small pussy cat looking into a mirror, and the reflection in the mirror, he sees himself as a lion. And that's how you need to feel about yourself. Don't see the pussycat, see yourself as the lion. You need to believe you can accomplish anything you set your mind to, and then make it happen. Go out and do it.
Oh, I love that. What if you could, right? I love that. So everybody, we've been graced with some little bit of time of with Ken Kunken. Kunken. Did I just screw it up at the end there?
Pumpkin is great. That's good.
I went all this time. I knew I was going to finally
Yeah.
screw it up. Uh, Ken is the author of I Dream of Things That Never Were, the Ken Kunken story about his last 55 years as a quadriplegic, everything he's been able to achieve, which most, I guess, undisabled people would never be able to do in their wildest dreams. So you're an inspiration, my friend. I'm grateful for you here. So where can we find more of Ken? Where can we contact you, reach out to you, get your books? Do you have a website, Facebook, social media? Where can we get more of Ken?
Well, thank you, Gary. One, they could go to my website, which is kenkunken.com, kenkunken.com, and that will tell them a lot more about me and where they can get the book. I'm also on Facebook and Instagram. My wife controls all of that. She put me on that. But I might add that my book is available not only in a hardcover, but in an ebook version, in a Kindle version, as well as in an audio book. I narrated the audiobook with my son Timothy actually doing the
Yes,
recording. So
that's
Timothy did
awesome.
the recording, and it's now out an audiobook, ebook, as well as the hardcover.
Ah, I love that. As you can tell, I love books. I love authors. I go out of my way every chance I get to interview authors because I one day I'm going to write a book. But I always ask people when they say they have an audiobook, I said, "Did you read it?" And so many of them say no. And I'm like, I've listened to some audiobooks. I've got Audible. I don't care for audiobooks. I like to hold a book in my hand. I like to read a book. I drift off if I'm listening to it. But I'm so glad that you did your own reading of the book. It really makes a difference to the book. So I'm glad that you did that. And thank you, Timmy. Thank you,
Okay.
big Timmy buddy out there. Big Tim. When I see him, I'll say thank you. But this has been great. And thank Anna because again, I kind of spaced on us a little bit. I'm so grateful that Anna reached back out so we can get together and share your story because it's been wonderful, Ken.
Great.
I really
Thank you,
appreciate it.
Gary. It's been wonderful for me and my wife as well to be on this broadcast with you. I thought It was a pleasure dealing with you, answering your questions. And this interview just really flew by the time for it. So thank you, Gary.
You're welcome. The pleasure was all mine. And all right, guys, thank you again for reaching in, and I'll see you soon. See ya.